Chen's warehouse stood as a testament to 15 years of hard work on the outskirts of Riverside Heights, a quiet suburban area in Northern California. As the owner of Pacific Distribution Solutions, he had carefully chosen this location for its perfect balance, close enough to major highways for efficient deliveries, yet tucked away from the chaos of industrial zones. The 20,000-square-foot facility, with its sprawling parking lot designed to accommodate both his fleet of delivery trucks and employee vehicles, represented everything he had built from scratch after leaving corporate life. But on a crisp Monday morning in October, Alex would discover that success sometimes makes you a target, and that not everyone respects the boundaries between private enterprise and public convenience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign that something was wrong came when Alex turned onto Industrial Park Drive at 6:30 a.m. Through the early morning fog, he noticed an unusual number of cars parked in his lot, vehicles he didn't recognize. As he approached the entrance, his confusion turned to disbelief. Sedans, SUVs, and minivans filled nearly every space, leaving barely enough room for his own car. A delivery truck sat idling at the entrance, its driver looking increasingly frustrated as he tried to navigate around the maze of unauthorized vehicles. "What in the world?" Alex muttered, parking his Tesla Model Y along the curb. He stepped out into the chilly morning air, his breath visible in small clouds as he surveyed the scene. The warehouse's spacious lot, typically organized with clearly marked spaces for employees and delivery vehicles, had been transformed into what looked like a residential parking area. Some cars even displayed resident parking permits from Oak Ridge Estates, the upscale planned community that had sprung up across the street over the past 2 years. Alex pulled out his phone and called his operations manager, Sarah Martinez, who always arrived early to coordinate the morning deliveries. "Sarah, are you seeing this? What's going on with our lot?" "I was just about to call you," Sarah replied, her voice tense. "I got here 20 minutes ago and had to park 3 blocks away. Half our morning shift can't find parking, and we've got 6 deliveries scheduled in the next hour. Nobody seems to know where these cars came from. They just started showing up over the weekend." As Alex walked through the lot, examining the vehicles more closely, he noticed something that made his blood boil. Many of the cars had identical pieces of paper on their dashboards, official-looking permits with the Oak Ridge Estates HOA logo. Someone had apparently decided his private property was the solution to their parking problems, without so much as a courtesy call. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this," Alex told Sarah. "Try to contact any drivers you can reach and tell them to wait. I'll head over to the HOA office as soon as they open." By 8 a.m., Alex found himself walking into the gleaming lobby of the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center. The contrast between the modern, well-appointed space and his current mood couldn't have been starker. A young receptionist greeted him with a practiced smile. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," Alex stated firmly. "There's an urgent situation regarding your residents using my private property for parking." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you must be Mr. Chen from the warehouse." "Yes, Mrs. Victoria Harrison, our HOA president, is expecting you. She's in her office." That last detail made Alex pause. They were expecting him? Before he could process what that meant, a door opened and a well-dressed woman in her 50s emerged. Victoria Harrison carried herself with the confidence of someone used to getting her way, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, and her expression suggesting mild inconvenience rather than concern. "Mr. Chen, please come in," she said, gesturing to her office. "I assume you're here about the parking initiative we've implemented. Let's discuss this like reasonable people, shall we?" As Alex followed her into the office, he had no idea that this conversation would mark the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, challenge his principles, and ultimately force him to take actions that would send shockwaves through the entire community. Victoria Harrison's office reflected the same polished aesthetic as the lobby, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. She settled behind her expansive desk, gesturing for Alex to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing her. "Mr. Chen," she began, her tone carrying an air of rehearsed diplomacy, "I understand you might be concerned about our new parking arrangement, but I assure you this decision was made with careful consideration of our community's needs." Alex leaned forward, struggling to maintain his composure. "Arrangement? There is no arrangement, Mrs. Harrison. You're allowing your residents to park on private property without any authorization. My business operations are being severely disrupted." Victoria waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing away an annoying fly. "The way we see it, your lot sits mostly empty during evening hours. Our community has experienced significant growth, and parking has become a pressing issue. We're simply optimizing available resources." Optimizing available... Alex cut himself off, taking a deep breath. "Your HOA has no authority over my property. Those spaces are for my employees and delivery vehicles. Right now I have workers who can't park, deliveries that can't be made, and a business that's grinding to a halt." Victoria's practiced smile remained unchanged. "Mr. Chen, Oak Ridge Estates is a premier community. Our residents pay substantial HOA fees, and they expect solutions to their problems. Your lot is adjacent to our development, and frankly, it seemed wasteful to have all that empty space when our residents need it." "So you just decided to take it?" Alex's voice rose slightly. "Without asking, without any kind of agreement or compensation?" "We did send you a courtesy notice," Victoria replied, opening a folder on her desk. "A courtesy notice. I never received anything." She pulled out a single sheet of paper. "It was mailed 3 weeks ago, informing you of the community's decision to utilize your lot for overflow parking during non-business hours, since we received no objection." "Because I never got your notice," Alex interrupted. "And even if I had, you can't just declare that you're taking over someone else's property. This isn't how things work." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Chen, I think you're being unnecessarily difficult. We're willing to formalize this arrangement. Perhaps we could discuss a nominal fee." "There's nothing to discuss," Alex stood up. "Those parking permits you issued are invalid. I want every car removed from my lot by the end of the day." "That's not going to happen." Victoria's voice took on a steely edge. "Our residents need those spaces. If you persist in being uncooperative, the HOA board will be forced to take action. We have considerable resources and influence in this community." Alex stared at her, momentarily speechless at her audacity. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," she smiled thinly. "I'm simply suggesting you consider the bigger picture. Fighting the HOA could make things very uncomfortable for your business. Why not be a good neighbor and work with us?" "A good neighbor?" Alex's voice was quiet but intense. "A good neighbor doesn't steal property. A good neighbor doesn't make threats. You have until 5 p.m. today to notify your residents and clear my lot. After that, I'll take whatever legal action is necessary to protect my property rights." As he turned to leave, Victoria called after him. "Think carefully about this, Mr. Chen. You don't want the HOA as an enemy." Walking back to his warehouse, Alex's mind raced. The conversation had been more disturbing than he'd anticipated. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. The HOA had deliberately commandeered his property and was now trying to bully him into accepting it. He found Sarah waiting. In his office, concern etched on her face. "How did it go?" "Worse than I expected," Alex replied, sinking into his chair. They knew exactly what they were doing. They're trying to strong-arm me into letting them use our lot. Sarah's eyes widened. Can they do that? No, but they're going to try. Alex pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. Get me the number for Anderson and Mills law firm and document everything. Take photos of all the cars, the permits they're using, everything. If they want a fight, we'll make sure we're prepared. As Sarah left to carry out his instructions, Alex stared out his office window at the crowded parking lot. The morning sun now fully illuminated the scale of the problem. Dozens of unauthorized vehicles consuming spaces his business desperately needed. He had built this company from nothing, and he wasn't about to let an overreaching HOA take what was rightfully his. But as he began dialing his lawyer's number, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. James Anderson, Alex's attorney, arrived at the warehouse shortly after lunch, his briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other. The seasoned lawyer had handled property disputes for over 2 decades, but his eyebrows rose noticeably as he surveyed the parking lot situation. Well, this is a new one, he remarked, following Alex through the facility. I've seen HOAs try some creative interpretations of their authority, but openly commandeering private commercial property. That's bold, even for them. Inside Alex's office, Sarah had prepared a comprehensive documentation package. Photos of the parked vehicles, copies of the invalid parking permits, and a timeline of events covered the conference table. She had even recorded videos of delivery trucks struggling to navigate the crowded lot. The HOA president, Victoria Harrison, practically admitted they did this deliberately, Alex explained, showing James the photos. They sent some notice I never received and took my lack of response as consent. Now they're threatening to make things uncomfortable for my business if I don't cooperate. James picked up one of the photos, studying the HOA permit visible on a car's dashboard. This is good documentation. They've created a paper trail showing their intent. Did Mrs. Harrison make any specific threats during your conversation? She implied the HOA would use their resources and influence against me, Alex replied. Said fighting them would be bad for business. The lawyer nodded, making notes. Classic intimidation tactics. HOAs often rely on their reputation for aggressive litigation to bully people into compliance. But they've overplayed their hand here. This isn't a fence height violation or unapproved paint color. They're interfering with a legitimate business operation, Sarah interjected, holding up a spreadsheet. I've calculated the impact on our operations. We've had 3 delayed deliveries today alone, and 7 employees couldn't find parking. 2 called out because they couldn't find spaces within walking distance. Document everything, James advised, reviewing the numbers. Every delayed delivery, every employee issue, every bit of lost productivity. We'll need to show concrete damages if this goes to court. He turned to Alex. What's your ideal outcome here? I want my lot back. Simple as that, Alex stated firmly. I'm not interested in their offers to pay for the spaces. This is private property, and I need it for my business. Then let's start with a formal cease and desist letter. James pulled out his laptop. We'll give them 48 hours to remove all vehicles and rescind those parking permits. We'll also demand they issue a formal notice to residents that the lot is off limits. As James drafted the letter, Alex received an unexpected call. The caller ID showed Richard Torres, the owner of a small manufacturing facility 2 blocks away. Alex, this is Rich from Torres Manufacturing, the voice came through. Listen, I heard about your run-in with Oak Ridge Estates HOA this morning. Been watching the situation with their residents taking over your lot. You need to know, they tried the same thing with my property last year. Alex straightened in his chair, putting the call on speaker. What happened? They started small, a few cars here and there, then suddenly half my lot was full of resident vehicles. When I complained, Victoria Harrison gave me the same song and dance about community needs and being a good neighbor. They even tried to pass some bogus community ordinance claiming authority over business parking in the area. James looked up from his laptop, interest piqued. How did you resolve it? Had to get aggressive, Richard replied. Towed a few cars, got my lawyer involved. They backed down eventually, but not before trying to organize a boycott of my business. Just wanted you to know what you might be up against. They play dirty when they don't get their way. After thanking Richard and ending the call, Alex turned to James. Sounds like this isn't their first attempt at a land grab. No, but it might be their last, James replied, finishing the cease and desist letter. Mr. Torres's experience could be valuable if we need to establish a pattern of behavior. For now, let's get this letter delivered and see how they respond. In the meantime, he pulled out a business card. I know a reliable towing company that handles commercial properties. You might want to have them on standby. As Sarah left to document more parking violations, Alex stared at the towing company's card. He had hoped to resolve this professionally, but the HOA's actions and Richard's warning suggested he needed to be prepared for a more aggressive approach. The next 48 hours would determine whether this situation could be resolved amicably, or if more drastic measures would be necessary. The 48-hour deadline was approaching, but the HOA's response came much sooner than expected. Early the next morning, Sarah rushed into Alex's office, her face tense with concern. You need to see this, she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was the Oak Ridge Estates community website, featuring a newly posted announcement titled, Urgent, Business Owner Threatens Community Parking Rights. Below it was Alex's photo, clearly taken from his company's website, alongside a scathing message portraying him as an inconsiderate business owner, refusing to help solve the community's parking crisis. They're trying to control the narrative, Alex muttered, scrolling through the post. The announcement encouraged residents to stand firm against corporate bullying and suggested that Pacific Distribution Solutions was threatening the community's way of life. It conveniently omitted any mention of private property rights or the impact on his business operations. Before Alex could finish reading, his phone buzzed with a text from James Anderson. Turn on Channel 7 News. Alex quickly pulled up the local news station's website on his computer. There was Victoria Harrison, immaculately dressed and wearing a concerned expression, speaking to a reporter outside the HOA office. Our community is simply asking for cooperation from our business neighbors, she was saying, her voice carrying that perfect blend of reasonableness and concern. Instead, we're facing threats of legal action and towing. Is this really how we want our business community to treat residents? She's good, Sarah remarked, watching the interview. Making it sound like you're the unreasonable one. Alex's phone rang again. This time it was James calling. I saw the news, Alex said before his lawyer could speak. They're playing hardball, James replied. But they're also showing their hand. That community post and news interview, they're trying to pressure you through public opinion because they know they don't have legal standing. Have you noticed any changes in the parking situation? Alex glanced out his window at the lot. If anything, there are more cars than yesterday. They're definitely not backing down. Document everything, James advised. Every car, every permit, every impact on your business. And Alex, be prepared for some backlash. HOAs are good at mobilizing their members. The backlash arrived sooner than expected. By midday, Pacific Distribution Solutions' social media pages were flooded with negative comments from Oak Ridge Estates residents. Some accused Alex of being greedy, others suggested boycotting his business, and a few even made veiled threats about consequences for not cooperating with the community. Sarah had also noticed unusual activities around the warehouse. There are people taking photos of our building and employees, she reported, and someone's been noting down the license plates of our delivery trucks. Alex was documenting yet another block delivery when he received an unexpected visit. Linda Chen, no relation, one of the HOA board members, approached him in the parking lot. Unlike Victoria's confrontational stance, Linda seemed more conciliatory. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to speak with you unofficially," she said, glancing around nervously. "Not everyone on the board agrees with how Victoria is handling this situation. She's used to getting her way." Alex studied her carefully. "Go on." "The parking situation is real. We do have a problem, but some of us feel Victoria's approach is too aggressive. She's convinced the board that if we push hard enough, you'll cave in rather than face prolonged conflict with the community." "That's not going to happen," Alex stated firmly. Linda nodded. "I figured as much. Just be careful. Victoria has a history of making things personal when she doesn't get her way. The last business owner who crossed her ended up dealing with monthly code violation complaints for over a year." After Linda left, Alex called an emergency meeting with his management team. They gathered in the conference room, where Sarah had set up a presentation of all the documentation they'd gathered over the past 2 days. "The situation is escalating," Alex began, addressing his team. "The HOA is trying to paint us as the villains, and they're not backing down. I need to know, are you all prepared for what might come next? This could get ugly before it gets better." His team's response was unanimous. They stood behind his decision to protect the business. As they discussed strategies for handling delayed deliveries and employee parking issues, Alex's phone buzzed with a text from James. The lawyer had reviewed the HOA's public statements and Linda's warning. "Time to take action," the message read. "I'll have the towing authorization ready by morning. Just say the word." Alex looked out at his team, then at the crowded parking lot beyond. The HOA's escalation had made one thing clear: reasoning with them wasn't going to work. As he typed his response to James, he knew the next day would mark a turning point. In this conflict, the question was, just how far would Victoria Harrison and the HOA go when they realized he wasn't going to back down? Dawn hadn't yet broken when Alex arrived at the warehouse the next morning. The parking lot was at its fullest. Residents had apparently grown so comfortable with their unauthorized parking that many now left their vehicles overnight. In the dim light of early morning, he counted over 40 cars bearing HOA permits. At precisely 6 a.m., 4 tow trucks from Valley Recovery Services pulled into position at the lot's entrance. Dave Martinez, the company's operations manager, approached Alex with a clipboard. "Everything's in order," Dave said, reviewing the paperwork. "We've got your property documentation, proof of proper signage, and authorization forms. We'll photograph each vehicle's position and permit before removal. Do you want us to start with any particular section?" Alex nodded, pointing to several cars blocking the loading dock. "Those first. We have deliveries starting at 7, and we need that area clear." The operation began with mechanical precision. Each tow truck operator worked systematically, documenting everything with photos and video before carefully removing the vehicles. Dave supervised the process, ensuring every regulation was followed to the letter. Sarah arrived just as the first car was being towed. "I posted notices on all our social media channels," she reported. "Clear statement about private property rights and a warning that unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense." James reviewed the language this morning. "Good," Alex replied, watching another car being hooked up. "How are we handling deliveries today?" "I've got Tommy and Miguel directing trucks as soon as space is clear. We should be back on schedule by noon if all goes well." The piece lasted exactly 47 minutes. The first resident appeared just before 7 a.m., a man in a bathrobe rushing across the street from Oak Ridge Estates. His face reddened as he watched his BMW being secured to a tow truck. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, storming toward Alex. "You can't tow my car. The HOA gave us permission to park here." Alex maintained his composure, having rehearsed this moment. "The HOA doesn't have authority over private property. There are clearly posted signs warning that unauthorized vehicles will be towed. Here's the information for retrieving your vehicle." He handed the man a printed card with the towing company's details. The man crumpled the card in his fist. "You're going to regret this. Just wait until Victoria hears about it." More residents began arriving, drawn by the commotion. Some filmed with their phones, others made angry calls, and a few tried to prevent their cars from being towed by jumping into them. Dave's team handled each situation professionally, pausing when legally required, but continuing their work as soon as possible. By 8:30 a.m., the situation had escalated significantly. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of the property, many still in pajamas or robes. Victoria Harrison arrived in her Mercedes, parking it defiantly in the middle of the now clearing lot. "Mr. Chen," she called out, her voice carrying across the lot. "Stop this immediately. You're making a serious mistake." Alex walked over to her, keeping his distance from the angry crowd. "Mrs. Harrison, every car parked here without authorization will be towed, including yours, if you don't move it." Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "This is outrageous. We tried to be reasonable to work with you. Now you'll face the consequences. The HOA will..." "Will what?" Alex interrupted. "Continue trespassing, file baseless complaints, try to intimidate me. Everything you've done is documented, Mrs. Harrison. Every threat, every attempt at coercion. Would you like me to call the police to explain why you're interfering with legal vehicle removal from private property?" Before Victoria could respond, a news van pulled into the street. The same reporter who had interviewed her the day before emerged with a camera operator. "Perfect timing," Victoria said with a cold smile. "Let's see how the community responds when they see how you're treating your neighbors." But as the reporter approached, Alex noticed she wasn't heading toward Victoria. Instead, she walked directly to him. "Mr. Chen, I'm Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 News. We received some interesting information about similar HOA parking takeover attempts in this area. Would you care to comment on what appears to be a pattern of property rights violations by the Oak Ridge Estates HOA?" Victoria's smile vanished. Behind her, Dave's team continued their methodical work, the lot gradually clearing of unauthorized vehicles. Alex could see his regular employees beginning to arrive, finally able to park in their designated spaces. "I'd be happy to comment," Alex replied, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and I have extensive documentation to share about how this situation has developed, including proof of how the HOA deliberately misled residents about their authority over private property." As the reporter began her interview, Alex caught a glimpse of Victoria storming back to her car, phone pressed to her ear. The crowd of residents had started to thin, many rushing off to the towing company to retrieve their vehicles. Sarah approached with an update. "Loading dock is clear. First delivery of the day just pulled in, right on schedule." Alex nodded, watching, as normal business operations resumed on one side of the lot, while chaos continued on the other. The battle wasn't over. He knew Victoria Harrison well enough by now to expect retaliation, but for the first time since this conflict began, he felt like he had regained control of his property, one towed car at a time. The afternoon following, the mass towing, Alex's prediction of retaliation, proved accurate, but the form it took surprised even him. While his warehouse operations had finally returned to normal, the HOA launched a sophisticated campaign against his business that went far beyond angry residents and social media posts. Sarah burst into his office, laptop in hand, her expression grim. "They're not just posting on their community website anymore. Look at this." She turned the screen toward him, revealing a professionally designed website titled "Stop Corporate Bullying in Riverside Heights." The site featured dramatic photos of residents, many elderly or with young children, allegedly stranded without parking, alongside accusations that Pacific Distribution Solutions was destroying community property values. "There's more," Sarah continued, scrolling through her phone. "They've contacted all our major clients. Someone's been sending emails claiming we're under investigation for business code violations and suggesting they should reconsider their partnerships with us." Alex reached for his phone to call James, but it was already ringing. The lawyer was calling him. "I assume you've seen their latest moves," James said without preamble. "They're walking a very fine line between aggressive advocacy and defamation. I'm documenting everything, but there's something else you should know. Victoria Harrison just filed multiple complaints with the City Planning Commission, challenging your property's commercial zoning status." "Can she do that?" Alex asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She can try. The complaints are baseless, but they'll require responses, documentation, maybe even inspections. It's a classic harassment tactic, death by paperwork." As if on cue, Alex's email pinged with a notice from the city about an urgent safety inspection scheduled for the following morning. The citation mentioned anonymous complaints about hazardous business practices and unauthorized commercial activity. The warehouse intercom crackled. "Alex, you better come to the front." Tommy's voice carried an edge of concern. "The police are here." In the reception area, Alex found two police officers speaking with Tommy. Behind them, through the glass doors, he could see Victoria Harrison standing in the parking lot with several HOA board members, all looking expectantly toward the building. "Mr. Chen," one officer approached, "we've received complaints about aggressive business practices and intimidation of local residents. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" For the next hour, Alex patiently explained the situation, showing the officers his property documentation, the history of HOA encroachment, and video evidence of their unauthorized parking operation. The officers, to their credit, quickly realized they were being used as pawns in a property dispute. "Just keep everything documented," the senior officer advised before leaving, "and call us if there's any actual harassment from either side." Victoria's expression soured as the police left without taking action. She pulled out her phone, likely planning her next move. As the day progressed, Alex received unexpected support from an unlikely source. Linda Chen, the HOA board member who had warned him earlier, emailed him minutes from recent board meetings. The documents revealed that Victoria had never obtained proper board approval for her parking scheme. She had acted unilaterally, assuming the board would fall in line as they usually did. "This could be useful," James said, when Alex forwarded him the documents. "It shows Victoria exceeded her authority. Some residents might be interested to know their HOA president exposed them to liability without proper authorization." By evening, the situation had evolved into a full community crisis. The local newspaper's website featured dueling opinion pieces, one from Victoria painting Alex as a corporate tyrant, another from Richard Torres, the neighboring business owner, exposing the HOA's history of property rights violations. The Oak Ridge Estates community itself showed signs of division. While some residents continued their angry protests, others began questioning Victoria's leadership. Posts appeared on the community forum asking uncomfortable questions about legal expenses and potential liability. Alex was reviewing security camera footage of the day's events when Sarah called him to the warehouse floor. A small group of residents had gathered outside, but unlike the angry mob from that morning, these people seemed different. "Mr. Chen?" A woman stepped forward as Alex approached. "I'm Amanda Rodriguez, and we represent a group of Oak Ridge Estates residents who disagree with how Victoria has handled this situation. We've started a petition for an emergency HOA board meeting to address her actions." Alex listened as Amanda explained how Victoria's aggressive tactics had divided the community. Many residents were angry not just about the towing, but about being misled into believing they had legitimate permission to park in his lot. "We're not all like this," Amanda assured him. Some of us understand property rights and believe Victoria has gone too far. We'd like to work toward a real solution to our parking issues, one that doesn't involve stealing someone else's property. As the group left, Alex received another email from James. Victoria had scheduled a press conference for the following morning, presumably to escalate her public relations war. But attached to the email was something interesting, a copy of the HOA's bylaws regarding leadership removal procedures. "Thought you might want to pass this along to some concerned residents," James wrote, "particularly the sections about board members exceeding their authority and exposing the HOA to liability." Alex forwarded the document to Amanda, then turned to Sarah. "Get the security cameras ready for tomorrow. Something tells me Victoria's press conference might not go exactly as she planned." The morning of Victoria's press conference dawned with an unexpected twist. As news vans began setting up their equipment in front of the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, they found themselves capturing a different story than the one Victoria had planned. More than 50 residents had gathered, carrying signs with messages like "HOA leadership reform now" and "Stop abusing power." Alex watched the scene unfold from his office window, where Sarah had set up a laptop streaming the local news coverage. Amanda Rodriguez and her group had worked through the night, gathering signatures and spreading the word about Victoria's unauthorized actions. "Look who just arrived," Sarah pointed to the screen. Victoria's Mercedes pulled into the community center parking lot, but instead of her usual confident stride, her movements seemed tense. She was accompanied by 2 men in suits, likely lawyers, and several loyal board members. The news cameras swung between the protesters and Victoria's group as they made their way to the podium set up for the press conference. Channel 7's Rebecca Torres, who had covered the towing incident, stood ready with her microphone, clearly sensing that today's story might be even bigger than expected. "Mrs. Harrison," Rebecca called out, "would you care to comment on the allegations that you exceeded your authority by implementing the parking program without proper board approval?" Victoria's practiced smile flickered slightly. "Today's announcement concerns the aggressive actions taken by Pacific Distribution Solutions against our community members. We're here to discuss—" "What about the HOA meeting minutes?" Another reporter interrupted, holding up printed documents, copies of what Linda Chen had provided. "These show no formal vote was ever taken on the parking initiative. Did you mislead residents about having legitimate access to private property?" The crowd of residents grew louder, with Amanda's group moving closer to the podium. One of Victoria's lawyers whispered something in her ear, but she waved him off, determined to regain control of the narrative. The parking initiative was implemented under emergency provisions, Victoria declared, her voice rising above the crowd. "As HOA president, I have the authority to take necessary actions for community welfare. The real issue here is a business owner who chose confrontation over cooperation." "That's not true!" A new voice cut through the chaos. Linda Chen emerged from the crowd, clutching a folder. "I have the HOA bylaws right here. Emergency provisions require board notification and a vote within 48 hours. None of that happened. You exposed our residents to liability and legal fees without authorization." The news cameras swiveled to capture the confrontation. Victoria's composed facade cracked as she realized her press conference had become a public referendum on her leadership. Back at the warehouse, Alex's phone rang. It was James. "Are you watching this?" the lawyer asked. "It's better than we could have hoped. The residents are doing our work for us." "What's our next move?" Alex asked, watching as more residents joined the protest group. "Wait and watch," James advised. "The HOA is imploding on its own. Victoria's actions have triggered exactly what she was trying to avoid, public scrutiny of her leadership." The press conference descended further into chaos as residents began sharing their own stories. One elderly man described how Victoria had assured him the parking arrangement was completely legal. A young mother talked about paying the towing. a fee from her grocery budget. With each story, the anger in the crowd shifted from Alex to Victoria. Rebecca Torres, seizing the moment, turned her report into an impromptu town hall. Mrs. Harrison, residents are claiming you deliberately misled them about the legality of parking on private property. Did you consider the financial impact on families when they had to retrieve their towed vehicles? Victoria's response was cut short by the arrival of 3 more board members who had initially supported her. They huddled with her lawyers, speaking in urgent whispers. After a tense moment, one of the lawyers stepped to the microphone. The Oak Ridge Estates HOA board will be convening an emergency meeting this evening to address these concerns, he announced. No further comments at this time. As Victoria and her entourage retreated into the community center, the cameras captured something unprecedented. She looked rattled, her usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Sarah, who had been monitoring social media, turned to Alex. The community forum is exploding. Residents are calling for a complete audit of HOA decisions under Victoria's leadership. Some are even talking about legal action against the HOA for exposing them to liability. Alex's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Emergency board meeting. At 7 p.m. We have enough signatures to force a leadership vote. Thank you for the bylaws info. It was the key we needed. As the morning's events played out on multiple news channels, Alex felt a mixture of vindication and sympathy. He had stood his ground to protect his property rights, but he hadn't anticipated the depth of division it would expose within the Oak Ridge Estates community. Should we attend the emergency meeting? Sarah asked. Alex shook his head. This is in the community issue to resolve. We've made our position clear. The parking lot is private property. End of discussion. How they handle their internal leadership problems is up to them. As the protest continued outside the community center, Alex turned his attention back to his business operations. He had won his battle, but the war within Oak Ridge Estates was just beginning, and he suspected Victoria Harrison's reign as HOA president was about to come to an inglorious end. The emergency HOA board meeting that evening generated more interest than any gathering in Oak Ridge Estates history. Though Alex had chosen not to attend, Sarah monitored the situation through text updates from Amanda and the community's live social media feeds. The community center's main hall, typically half-empty during board meetings, was packed to capacity. "UK won't believe this," Sarah said, reading from her phone. They had to move the meeting to the gymnasium because of the turnout. Apparently, even residents who never attend HOA meetings are showing up. Alex was working late, catching up on business matters that had been neglected during the parking dispute. "How's it going?" According to Amanda, it's intense. Victoria tried to limit discussion to approved agenda items only, but the residents voted to override her. They're going through every unauthorized decision she's made as HOA president. The updates kept coming throughout the evening. Residents had come prepared with documentation, questions, and years of pent-up frustration. The parking lot incident had cracked open a dam of discontent, releasing a flood of grievances about Victoria's leadership style and decision-making. Around 8:30 p.m., Linda Chen sent Alex an email with a video clip from the meeting. Victoria stood at the podium, her composure finally cracking under the weight of accusations and evidence. "Everything I did was for the good of this community," she insisted, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "The parking solution—" "It wasn't a solution," a resident interrupted. "It was trespassing. You told us we had permission to park there. Now we're all out hundreds of dollars in towing fees because you exceeded your authority." The video showed Victoria's lawyers attempting to regain control of the narrative, but the residents weren't having it. Years of rubber-stamped decisions and unilateral actions were being dragged into the light. "Mr. Chen's company wasn't your first target, was it?" Another resident stood up, waving printed documents. "I have evidence of at least 3 other attempts to seize private property for community use under your leadership. How many lawsuits are we exposed to?" Sarah's phone buzzed with another update from Amanda. "They're calling for a vote of no. Confidence," she reported. "Victoria's trying to block it, claiming they need more notice, but Linda Chen is citing the bylaws about emergency removal of officers who've exposed the HOA to liability." Alex leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how quickly events had spiraled. What began as a simple property rights issue had evolved into a community revolution. His stand against the HOA's overreach had inadvertently exposed deeper problems within Oak Ridge Estate's governance. Just before 10 p.m., the decisive news arrived. Amanda's text was succinct. "Vote passed, Victoria's out, entire board being restructured. We're implementing new oversight measures." Minutes later, security cameras showed Victoria's Mercedes speeding past the warehouse, away from the community she'd ruled over for so long. Her final attempt to maintain control had failed spectacularly, undone by her own hubris and the community's awakening to her abuse of power. The next morning, Alex arrived at work to find an envelope taped to his office door. Inside was a formal letter from the interim HOA board. "Dear Mr. Chen, on behalf of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, we extend our sincere apologies for the unauthorized use of your property and the subsequent attempts to justify this unlawful action. The previous board's decisions were made without proper authority or consideration of legal implications. We have immediately rescinded all parking permits issued for your property and will be notifying residents that any unauthorized parking will result in immediate towing at vehicle owners' expense. Furthermore, we would like to compensate your business for any documented losses incurred during this incident. The interim board is committed to rebuilding trust with our business neighbors and ensuring all future HOA actions remain within our legal authority. Sincerely, Amanda Rodriguez, interim HOA president." Sarah reviewed the letter with obvious satisfaction. "Quite a difference from Victoria's approach," she remarked. "Indeed," Alex replied, noticing through his window that workers were removing the last traces of Victoria's regime, taking down the signs she'd posted about the parking initiative and replacing them with new notices clearly marking the boundaries between HOA and private property. Later that afternoon, Richard Torres, the business owner who had warned Alex about Victoria's tactics, stopped by the warehouse. "Heard the news," he said, shaking Alex's hand. "You didn't just win your battle. You helped the whole community by standing your ground. Victoria's been pushing boundaries for years, but nobody had the resources or will to challenge her properly." As they talked, Alex watched his parking lot functioning as intended, delivery trucks moving efficiently, employees parking without hassle, business operating smoothly. The past week's chaos seemed almost surreal now. "The thing about bullies," Richard continued, "is they rely on people backing down. Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand up to them to show others they can do the same." Alex nodded, thinking about how his simple defense of property rights had catalyzed a community's transformation. The parking lot dispute had ended, but its ripple effects would likely influence how HOAs in the area operated for years to come. As Richard left, Alex received one final text from Amanda. "First official board meeting next week. We're implementing new rules requiring resident votes on all major decisions. Thanks for helping us take our community back." 3 months after Victoria Harrison's dramatic departure, the transformation in both Alex's business operations and the Oak Ridge Estates community was remarkable. The parking lot dispute, which had seemed like a potential disaster for Pacific Distribution Solutions, had unexpectedly led to positive changes for everyone involved. Under Amanda Rodriguez's leadership, the new HOA board had implemented comprehensive reforms. Their first major initiative was addressing the actual parking shortage that had sparked the original conflict, but this time they did it legally and transparently. "You should see the difference," Sarah remarked one morning, showing Alex the latest community newsletter. "They've contracted with a nearby vacant lot owner to create additional resident parking. Everything properly negotiated, permitted and paid for." The newsletter also detailed the results of the HOA audit that followed Victoria's removal. The investigation had uncovered numerous instances of overreach and unauthorized decisions, leading to a complete overhaul of the association's governance structure. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to a particular section. "They've created an oversight committee that includes local business owners. Richard Torres is on it, and they've asked if you'd be interested in joining." Alex smiled, remembering how different things had been just a few months ago. His warehouse parking lot, once the battlefield for a heated property rights dispute, now stood as a symbol of proper boundaries and mutual respect. The morning's peace was interrupted by a knock on his office door. Rebecca Torres, the Channel 7 reporter who had covered the conflict, stood in the doorway with her camera operator. "Mr. Chen, got time for a follow-up story? We're doing a piece on how the parking dispute led to major reforms in local HOA governance. Several other communities are using Oak Ridge Estate's new policies as a model." Alex agreed to the interview, and they set up in front of the warehouse. As Rebecca prepared her questions, Alex noticed Linda Chen pulling into the lot. She had become a regular visitor, keeping him updated on the community's transformation. "The changes have gone far beyond just parking issues," Linda explained once the interview wrapped up. "That conflict with Victoria opened people's eyes. Residents are more engaged now, attending meetings, questioning decisions. We're actually functioning like a true community association instead of a private fiefdom." The interview aired the following week as part of a larger story about HOA reform. The piece included interviews with other business owners who had faced similar conflicts with their local associations, but highlighted Oak Ridge Estates as an example of positive change. "After years of unchecked authority," Rebecca's voiceover explained, "the parking dispute with Pacific Distribution Solutions became a catalyst for reform. The new board's transparency policies and inclusion of business stakeholders have created a model for HOA governance that balances community needs with property rights." The story's impact reached beyond their immediate area. Alex began receiving calls from business owners and residents in other communities asking for advice on handling similar situations. James, his lawyer, had even been invited to speak at a property rights conference about the case. "You've become something of a folk hero to small business owners," James joked during one of their conversations. "The man who stood up to HOA overreach and won." But the most significant changes were visible in the day-to-day operations. The warehouse parking lot, once crowded with unauthorized vehicles, now functioned smoothly. Deliveries arrived on schedule. Employees parked without hassle, and business flourished. The relationship with Oak Ridge Estates had also evolved. Under Amanda's leadership, the HOA began hosting monthly community business forums, creating an open dialogue between residents and local business owners. They discussed everything from parking solutions to community development plans, all within a framework of mutual respect and legal compliance. One morning, as Alex walked through his lot doing his routine inspection, he spotted an elderly resident, slowly making her way toward the warehouse. He recognized her from the community meetings, Mrs. Peterson, one of the residents who had initially been angry about the towing incident. "Mr. Chen," she called out, waving a small envelope. "I wanted to deliver this personally." Inside was a thank you card signed by several residents. The message acknowledged that while the parking dispute had been difficult, his stand against Victoria's overreach had ultimately benefited everyone. We didn't realize how much power we'd given up by staying silent, Mrs. Peterson explained. Sometimes it takes someone willing to say no to make people realize things need to change. As she left, Alex reflected on how differently things might have turned out if he'd given in to Victoria's pressure tactics. The easy path would have been to accept the HOA's encroachment, avoid conflict, and let them continue misusing their authority. Instead, his decision to stand firm had not only protected his property rights, but had helped a community reclaim its voice. The parking lot dispute, which had seemed like a simple property rights issue, had become a turning point for both his business and the entire neighborhood. Sarah appeared at his side, tablet in hand. "The new HOA newsletter just came out," she said. "They're featuring an article about successful community business partnerships. Apparently, we're the example of how setting clear boundaries actually leads to better relationships." Alex nodded, watching as a delivery truck smoothly backed into the loading dock. No unauthorized vehicles in sight. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest victories come from simply standing your ground and doing what's right, even when it would be easier to give in. 6 months after the parking dispute that had transformed both his business and the Oak Ridge Estates community, Alex stood at his office window reflecting on how much had changed. The morning sun illuminated his now orderly parking lot, where employees' cars and delivery trucks moved efficiently through their daily routines. The scene was remarkably different from that chaotic morning when he'd first discovered the HOA's unauthorized parking scheme. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah entered carrying a local business magazine. "You made the cover," she said, handing him the publication. The headline read, "From Conflict to Cooperation, How One Property Dispute Revolutionized HOA Business Relations." The article detailed how the parking lot confrontation had sparked a broader movement for HOA reform across the region. "Have you seen today's numbers?" Sarah asked, pulling up a spreadsheet on her tablet. "Our efficiency ratings are at an all-time high. No more delayed deliveries, no parking issues, and employee satisfaction has improved significantly." Alex was about to respond when his phone buzzed with a message from Amanda Rodriguez. The new HOA president had proven to be everything Victoria Harrison wasn't. Transparent, collaborative, and respectful of boundaries, her text contained a surprising piece of news. "Victoria just listed her house," Amanda wrote. "She's moving to Arizona." Apparently, several other communities had reached out about HOA consulting work, but our story followed her there too. Nobody wants advice from someone known for abusing their authority. The irony wasn't lost on Alex. Victoria's attempt to strong-arm him into surrendering his property rights had not only failed, but had ended up completely reshaping her life. Last he'd heard, she'd been unsuccessfully trying to rebuild her reputation in local property management circles. Richard Torres chose that moment to stop by, carrying architectural plans for his manufacturing facility. As a member of the new HOA Oversight Committee, he'd been instrumental in helping bridge the gap between business owners and residents. "Take a look at this," he said, spreading the plans across Alex's desk. "The city approved our proposal for a shared parking structure. Several business owners are participating, and the HOA is contributing funds they saved from better financial management. It's a real solution, not just pushing problems onto private property owners." The parking structure project exemplified the new spirit of cooperation that had emerged from the conflict. Instead of adversarial relationships, business owners and residents were finding ways to work together for mutual benefit. As they discussed the plans, Alex received another visitor. Linda Chen, now heading the HOA's Community Relations Committee, arrived with news about an upcoming event. "We're organizing a business community fair," she explained. "Local businesses showcasing their services, residents learning about employment opportunities, food trucks, the works. Would Pacific Distribution Solutions be interested in participating?" The idea of such an event would have seemed impossible during Victoria's reign, when she'd actively encouraged residents to view local businesses as adversaries to be conquered rather than neighbors to be embraced. "Count us in," Alex replied. "We've been thinking about expanding our workforce anyway." Later that afternoon, Alex attended a meeting at City Hall. The local business association had invited him to share his experience as part of a panel discussion on property rights and community relations. In the audience, he spotted several HOA board members from neighboring communities, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about implementing similar reforms. The key lesson, Alex explained during his presentation, wasn't just about standing up for property rights. It was about showing that proper boundaries and mutual respect actually create better communities than unchecked authority ever could. After the meeting, Rebecca Torres approached him for a quick interview. The Channel 7 reporter had followed the story from its dramatic beginnings through its successful resolution. "Your case has become a reference point," she noted. "We're getting reports of HOAs across the state revising their policies, implementing oversight committees, and improving communication with local businesses. Did you ever imagine taking back your parking lot would lead to such widespread changes?" Alex hadn't imagined it, but he was grateful for the outcome. The parking dispute had been stressful, even frightening at times, but standing his ground had proved to be the right decision. Not just for his business, but for the entire community. That evening, as Alex did his final walkthrough of the warehouse, he paused in the parking lot. The space that had once been a battlefield was now just what it was meant to be, a functional part of his business operations. But it represented something more, a reminder that positive change often requires someone willing to take a difficult stand. A car pulled up, and Amanda stepped out. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, handing him a document. It was the final report from the HOA's external audit, detailing the full scope of reforms implemented since Victoria's departure. The transformation was remarkable, from an organization known for overreach and intimidation to one celebrated for transparency and collaboration. "We're using your story in our new board member orientation," Amanda explained. "It's a perfect example of how not to handle community issues and, more importantly, how to rebuild trust once it's been broken." As the sun set over the warehouse, Alex realized that what had started as a simple defense of his property rights had evolved into something far more significant. It had become a catalyst for positive change, a reminder that sometimes the most important victories come from simply having the courage to say no to injustice, even when it would be easier to give in. 1 year to the day after the parking lot confrontation, Alex organized a small gathering in the warehouse break room. The attendees included his key staff, Amanda Rodriguez, Linda Chen, and other community members who had played crucial roles in transforming the relationship between Pacific Distribution Solutions and Oak Ridge Estates. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Sarah remarked, setting up a presentation she'd prepared for the occasion. On the screen, she displayed a series of before and after photos. The chaotic parking lot, filled with unauthorized vehicles, contrasted sharply with current images showing the orderly, efficient operation they'd achieved. "I found something interesting in our records," she continued, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Comparing last year's numbers to now, we've seen a 30% increase in operational efficiency. No more delayed deliveries, no parking conflicts, and employee satisfaction is at an all-time high." Amanda stepped forward, adding her own perspective. "The changes went far beyond just resolving the parking issue," she explained. "That conflict forced our community to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we'd been operating." She shared the results of Oak Ridge Estate's latest community survey. Resident participation in HOA meetings had increased by over 200%, and approval ratings For the new board's transparency policies were consistently above 90%. The hostile division between businesses and residents that Victoria had cultivated had been replaced by genuine cooperation. Richard Torres arrived a few minutes late, but he brought interesting news. "Remember those other communities that were dealing with similar HOA overreach?" he asked. "3 of them have now adopted our oversight committee model. They're calling it the Pacific Solution, though I think that name might need some work." The group chuckled, but the impact was serious. Their experience had created a ripple effect, influencing HOA governance practices across the region. James, Alex's lawyer, had even been hired to help draft new guidelines for HOA business relations in several neighboring cities. Linda Chen shared updates about the community's transformation. "We've completely revised our approach to community and challenges," she explained. "Instead of trying to force solutions through authority, we're focusing on collaboration and mutual benefit." She pulled out her tablet to show everyone the plans for their latest initiative, a joint business community development project that would create shared parking facilities, green spaces, and small business incubation spaces. The project, fully permitted and properly negotiated, stood in stark contrast to Victoria's attempted property grab. "Speaking of Victoria," Sarah interjected, "did you hear what happened with her in Arizona?" The room grew quiet. They'd all followed the story of their former HOA president's attempts to rebuild her career in another state. However, the reputation she'd earned through her actions at Oak Ridge Estates had followed her. "She tried to set up as an HOA consultant," Amanda explained, "but every time she approached a community, someone would share our story. Last I heard, she's left property management entirely. Sometimes the best lesson is learning you can't bully your way to success." Alex listened to these updates with satisfaction, but his attention was drawn to Mrs. Peterson, the elderly resident who had once been among the angriest about the towing incident. She'd become one of their strongest supporters after seeing how Victoria had misled the community. "You know what I realized?" Mrs. Peterson spoke up. "We were all so afraid of rocking the boat, of challenging authority, that we let one person's abuse of power become normal. Sometimes it takes someone from outside to show us what we shouldn't have accepted in the first place." The conversation turned to the future. The successful partnership between Pacific Distribution Solutions and Oak Ridge Estates had created new opportunities for both the business and the community. Alex's company had expanded, hiring several residents who'd learned about job opportunities. Through the new community engagement programs, Rebecca Torres, who had covered the original conflict, had recently contacted Alex about featuring their story in a documentary about community transformation and property rights. The parking dispute that could have torn the community apart had instead become a case study in positive change. As the gathering wound down, Alex took a moment to walk through his parking lot, a habit he'd maintained since the conflict. The space that had once been a battleground now symbolized something powerful, the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Amanda joined him outside. "You know," she said, "when I think about how close we came to letting Victoria's version of leadership become permanent, it's scary. Sometimes the right person just needs to say enough at the right time." Alex nodded, watching as a delivery truck smoothly backed into the loading dock. "It was never just about the parking lot," he replied. "It was about refusing to let someone abuse their authority, about showing that doing things the right way actually works better for everyone." As the sun set over the warehouse, casting long shadows across the now peaceful parking lot, Alex reflected on how a simple stand for property rights had catalyzed such far-reaching changes. The past year had taught him that positive transformation often begins with one person willing to stand firm against injustice, even when it would be easier to give in. The parking lot dispute had ended, but its lessons continued to influence. both the business and residential communities. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most significant victories come not from winning conflicts, but from transforming them into opportunities for positive change. 2 years after the parking dispute that had transformed Oak Ridge Estates, Alex found himself addressing a packed conference room at the Regional Business Leadership Summit. The annual event had chosen Building Better Business Community Relations as its theme, and Alex's experience had earned him the keynote speaker slot. The lesson wasn't just about protecting property rights, Alex explained to the audience of business owners and community leaders. It was about understanding that proper boundaries and mutual respect create stronger communities than unchecked authority ever could. In the front row, Sarah sat with Amanda Rodriguez, both now regular speakers at similar events. Their story had become a case study in how confronting injustice could lead to positive systemic change. The Pacific Solution, as it had become known despite Richard's reservations about the name, had been implemented in dozens of communities across 3 states. After the presentation, a group of business owners from a neighboring county approached Alex. They were dealing with their own HOA challenges and sought his advice. The key is documentation and principled resistance, Alex advised them. Stand your ground legally and professionally, but always leave room for positive change. The goal isn't to win a fight, it's to create better systems. Sarah joined them, tablet in hand. We've actually created a guide, she said, pulling up a document. It outlines the steps we took, the legal framework we used, and how we transformed conflict into cooperation. James helped us ensure everything's legally sound. The guide had become something of a blueprint for businesses facing similar challenges. It emphasized the importance of proper documentation, legal compliance, and maintaining professionalism even in the face of aggressive tactics. Back at the warehouse that afternoon, Alex met with a journalist from a national business magazine. The reporter was working on a feature about the changing dynamics between commercial enterprises and residential communities. Your parking lot dispute has become a reference point, the journalist noted, reviewing her notes. But what's more interesting is how it sparked a broader conversation about property rights and community governance. Alex showed her around the facility, including the parking lot that had started it all. The space had evolved beyond its original function. It now included clearly marked visitor spaces that could be used by Oak Ridge Estates residents during off-hours through a proper, legally negotiated agreement. This is what real solutions look like, Alex explained. Not taking what isn't yours, but finding ways to share resources that benefit everyone while respecting property rights. The journalist was particularly interested in the ripple effects of their story. Victoria Harrison's approach to HOA leadership had once been common, using authority to bully and intimidate rather than govern fairly. But the publicity surrounding the parking dispute had helped expose the flaws in that model. We've heard from HOAs across the country, Amanda added, joining them for the interview. They're using our experience to reform their own governance structures. It's become about more than parking. It's about creating accountable, transparent community leadership. Later that day, Alex received an unexpected visitor. A young entrepreneur named Michael Zhang had just purchased a warehouse several miles away and was facing similar challenges with his local HOA. I remembered your story, Michael explained, how you stood your ground when it would have been easier to give in. It gave me the courage to challenge some unauthorized demands from my own HOA. Alex spent an hour with Michael, sharing insights and lessons learned. The younger businessman took careful notes, particularly about the importance of building community relationships even while maintaining firm boundaries. The real victory, Alex told him, wasn't just protecting our property rights. It was showing that proper procedures and mutual respect actually work better than intimidation and overreach. As Michael left, Sarah brought in the latest community newsletter. The front page featured an article about the upcoming business community partnership forum, an event that would have been unthinkable during Victoria's tenure as HOA president. "Remember when they tried to organize a boycott of our business?" Sarah asked, smiling at the memory. "Now we're their model for successful community engagement." The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required persistence, professionalism, and a willingness to work toward positive change, even in the face of hostility. But the results had exceeded anyone's expectations. Richard Torres stopped by later with updates about the shared parking facility project. Construction was ahead of schedule, and several other businesses had joined the initiative. The project stood as a testament to what could be achieved when communities and businesses work together legally and respectfully. "You know what Victoria's biggest mistake was?" Richard mused. "She thought authority meant never having to compromise or collaborate. She never understood that real leadership is about finding solutions that work for everyone." As the day drew to a close, Alex walked through his parking lot one final time, a habit he'd maintained since the dispute. The space that had once been a battlefield now symbolized something powerful, the importance of standing up for what's right, and how doing so could lead to unexpected positive change. Amanda's words from their earlier interview echoed in his mind. Sometimes it takes one person willing to say no to make people realize things need to change. The parking lot dispute had done more than protect his property rights. It had helped transform the way communities and businesses interact, creating a model for cooperation based on respect rather than intimidation. 3 years after the parking dispute, Alex found himself in an unusual setting, a university classroom. The business school at State University had incorporated the Pacific Distribution Solutions case into their curriculum, and Alex had been invited as a guest lecturer for their course on business ethics and community relations. What happened in our parking lot wasn't just about towing cars, Alex explained to the attentive students. It was about standing up to systemic abuse of power and showing how proper procedures and mutual respect create better outcomes for everyone involved. The professor, Dr. Martinez, had developed an entire module around the incident. Students analyzed everything from the legal aspects to the community dynamics, using it as a framework for understanding business community conflicts and their resolution. Mr. Chen's experience provides valuable insights into several key areas. Dr. Martinez addressed the class: property rights, community governance, conflict resolution, and the importance of maintaining professional standards even in confrontational situations. During the Q&A session, one student raised her hand. "But weren't you afraid of the potential backlash? The HOA had significant resources and community influence." "Of course I was concerned," Alex admitted. "But there are moments when you have to stand firm on principle, even if it's difficult. The key was maintaining professionalism and ensuring every action we took was legally sound." After the lecture, Sarah, who had accompanied Alex to the university, showed the students their documentation system, the organized records that had proved crucial during the conflict. What had started as a defense against HOA overreach had evolved into a comprehensive model for business-community relations. "We still maintain these protocols," Sarah explained. "Not because we're expecting another conflict, but because clear documentation and transparent communication have become fundamental to our operation." Later that afternoon, Alex received a call from James, his lawyer. The state legislature was considering new regulations for HOA governance, and they wanted Alex to testify about his experience. "Your case has become a reference point," James explained. "Legislators are looking at implementing some of the oversight measures that Oak Ridge Estates adopted after Victoria's departure. They're calling it the Community Accountability Act." The proposed legislation incorporated many of the reforms that had emerged from their conflict: mandatory oversight committees, transparent decision-making processes, and clear limitations on HOA authority. Amanda Rodriguez had already agreed to testify about the positive changes these measures had brought to their community. Back at the warehouse, Alex met with a group of business students working on their master's theses. They were particularly interested in how the parking dispute had led to broader community transformation. The most significant change, Alex explained, showing them around the facility, wasn't in our parking lot. It was in people's understanding of how communities and businesses can work together productively. He showed them the new community engagement center they'd built adjacent to the warehouse, a space where local businesses and residents could meet, plan joint initiatives, and resolve potential conflicts before they escalated. Richard Torres joined them, adding his perspective as both a business owner and member of the HOA Oversight Committee. What happened here created a ripple effect, he explained. Other communities saw that there was a better way to handle business-resident relations. The students were particularly interested in Victoria Harrison's story, how her aggressive approach to HOA leadership had ultimately led to her downfall. It had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of proper governance. "Last I heard," Richard added, "she's written a book about her experience. Ironically, she's using it to warn other HOA leaders about the dangers of overreach and the importance of working within legal boundaries." As the day progressed, Alex received an email from a documentary filmmaker. The parking dispute and its aftermath had caught the attention of producers working on a series about community transformation and positive change. "Your story resonates because it's not just about winning a conflict," the filmmaker wrote. "It's about how standing up to injustice can lead to systemic improvements that benefit everyone." Sarah brought in the latest regional business journal, which featured an article about the growing network of communities adopting what they called the Pacific model of business community relations. The approach emphasized clear boundaries, mutual respect, and collaborative problem-solving. "Remember when we thought this was just about protecting our parking lot?" Sarah mused. "Now it's literally changing how communities operate." Alex nodded, reflecting on how their stand against HOA overreach had evolved into something much larger. The principles they'd fought for, property rights, fair governance, professional conduct, had become a blueprint for positive change. As he walked through the parking lot that evening, Alex noticed a group of residents and business owners meeting in the Community Engagement Center. They were discussing plans for a joint initiative to improve local infrastructure, the kind of collaborative project that would have been impossible under Victoria's leadership. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear the community apart had instead become a catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with one person willing to stand firm for what's right. 4 years after the parking dispute, Alex found himself preparing for another milestone. Pacific Distribution Solutions had been selected to receive the State Business Association's annual Community Impact Award, recognizing companies that had made significant contributions to improving business community relations. The ceremony was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown, and as Alex adjusted his tie in his office mirror, Sarah burst in with exciting news. "You won't believe this," she said, holding up her tablet. "The governor just signed the Community Accountability Act into law. They're citing our case as one of the primary inspirations for the legislation." The new law incorporated many of the reforms that had originated from their conflict with Victoria Harrison's HOA. It mandated transparency in community association governance, established clear boundaries for HOA authority, and required oversight. Committees that included both resident and business representation. Look who they quoted in the press release, Sarah continued, reading from the screen. Amanda Rodriguez. What started as a parking dispute in our community has evolved into a model for responsible governance and cooperative community relations. Later that evening at the awards ceremony, Alex found himself sharing a table with several key figures from the original conflict. Amanda was there, now serving as a consultant, helping other communities implement reform measures. Richard Torres had come with his wife, and even Linda Chen had made an appearance. Remember when Victoria tried to convince everyone that business owners were the enemy? Linda mused during dinner. Now we're celebrating how businesses and communities can work together for mutual benefit. The keynote speaker, a prominent state senator, used their story as an example of how standing up to injustice could lead to positive systemic change. The Pacific Distribution Solutions case showed us that the old model of adversarial community governance was fundamentally flawed, she explained. Sometimes it takes one person willing to say no to transform an entire system. After accepting the award, Alex was approached by a group of business owners from across the state. They were part of a newly formed alliance working to promote better business community relations. Your experience gave us a roadmap, one of them explained. We've been using your documentation protocols and communication strategies as templates for our own communities. Sarah, who had been monitoring social media, showed Alex something interesting on her phone. Victoria Harrison had posted a review of the new legislation on a property management forum. Surprisingly, she supported the reforms. Sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most important changes, Victoria had written. I learned through experience that authority without accountability inevitably leads to abuse. These new regulations will help prevent others from making the mistakes I made. Back at the warehouse the next day, Alex met with a delegation from another state's business development office. They were interested in implementing similar reforms in their region. The most important thing we learned, Alex explained as they toured the facility, was that protecting property rights and building strong community relations aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they work best together. He showed them the Community Engagement Center, which had become a model for similar facilities across the region. The space was currently hosting a meeting between local business owners and residents, discussing ways to address shared challenges through cooperation rather than confrontation. Richard Torres joined them for lunch, bringing news about the shared parking facility project that had grown out of their original conflict. We're opening 3 new locations, he announced. Other communities saw how well it worked here and wanted to implement similar solutions. The delegation was particularly interested in how they had transformed a potentially destructive conflict into an opportunity for positive change. The key, Alex explained, was maintaining professionalism even when faced with hostility. We never let it become personal, even when Victoria tried to make it so. Later that afternoon, Alex received an email from James. The lawyer had been asked to contribute to a legal textbook about property rights and community governance. They want to use our case as a central example, James wrote. It's become a reference point for how to handle similar disputes. Sarah brought in the latest community newsletter, which featured an article about the upcoming Business Community Partnership Forum. The event, now in its 4th year, had grown from a local gathering to a regional conference, attracting participants. And from across the state. Remember when we thought we were just fighting for our parking lot? Sarah asked, smiling at the memory. Now we're helping shape policy and transform communities. As the day drew to a close, Alex walked through his parking lot, a habit he'd maintained all these years. The space that had once been a battlefield now symbolized something much more significant: how standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, can lead to unexpected positive change. Amanda's words from the awards ceremony echoed in his mind. Sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest stands. The parking dispute that had threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for positive change, proving that principled resistance to injustice could lead to better solutions for everyone. 5 years after the parking dispute that had transformed both his business and countless communities, Alex stood at his office window, watching the morning sun illuminate a very different landscape than the one he'd faced that fateful morning. The parking lot that had once been ground zero for a heated conflict now represented something much more significant, a testament to how standing up for what's right could spark lasting positive change. A knock on his door interrupted his reflection. Sarah entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression that suggested important news. The National Business Journal just published their 10-year study on community business relations, she announced, opening the folder. They've dedicated an entire chapter to what they're calling the Pacific Distribution Solutions Effect. How one parking dispute revolutionized HOA governance across the country. The article detailed how their conflict with Victoria Harrison's HOA had sparked a movement for reform that had spread far beyond their local community. Over 200 HOAs had now adopted the oversight model that emerged from their experience, and dozens of state legislatures had incorporated elements of the Community Accountability Act into their own laws. There's more, Sarah continued, pulling up her tablet. Remember that documentary crew that interviewed us last year? Their film just won an award at the Regional Film Festival. They're calling it Drawing the Line: How One Business Changed. Community governance. As they discussed the news, Amanda Rodriguez arrived for their monthly community coordination meeting. The former interim HOA president, who had helped transform Oak Ridge Estates, had become a respected consultant on community governance. "You won't believe who reached out to me yesterday," Amanda said as she settled into a chair. Victoria Harrison. The room fell silent. None of them had heard from the former HOA president in years, not since she'd left the state following her failed attempts to rebuild her career in property management. "She's written a book," Amanda explained. "It's called Power and Responsibility: Lessons from an HOA's Fall. She wants to know if we'd be willing to contribute our perspectives. Says she's trying to help other HOA leaders avoid the mistakes she made." Alex leaned back in his chair, considering the irony. The woman who had once threatened to destroy his business was now using their conflict as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. Richard Torres joined them, bringing updates about the regional business alliance they'd helped establish. What had started as a small group of business owners supporting each other through HOA conflicts had evolved into a powerful advocacy organization promoting fair community governance. "We're opening chapters in 3 more states," Richard reported. "Business owners everywhere are realizing they don't have to choose between protecting their rights and maintaining good community relations." As they talked, Alex noticed activity in the parking lot below. A group of business students from the State University was touring the facility as part of their case study on effective business-community partnerships. The professor leading them was pointing out various features: the clearly marked spaces, the shared facilities area, the community engagement center. "It's strange to think," Sarah mused, watching the students, "that all of this started because someone tried to steal our parking lot. Now we're literally teaching the next generation about proper governance and community relations." Later that afternoon, Alex received a call from James, his lawyer. The State Bar Association was developing a continuing education course on property rights and community governance, using their case as a central example. "You've created a legacy," James told him. "Your stand against that HOA didn't just protect your property rights, it helped establish new standards for how communities and businesses interact." As the day progressed, Alex met with a delegation from another state's Chamber of Commerce. They were interested in implementing similar reforms in their region and wanted to understand how a simple parking dispute had led to such far-reaching changes. "The key wasn't just standing our ground," Alex explained. "It was showing that there's a better way to handle community-business relations. When you replace intimidation with cooperation, everyone benefits." The delegation toured the facility, paying particular attention to the Community Engagement Center. The space that had emerged from their conflict was now hosting regular meetings between business owners and residents, fostering the kind of cooperative relationship that had once seemed impossible under Victoria's leadership. As evening approached, Alex took his customary walk through the parking lot. The space that had once been filled with unauthorized vehicles and tension now operated smoothly, a symbol of how proper boundaries and mutual respect could create better outcomes for everyone. Amanda joined him outside, both of them reflecting on how far things had come. "You know what Victoria never understood," she said. "Real leadership isn't about forcing your will on others. It's about finding solutions that respect everyone's rights while benefiting the whole community." Looking at the peaceful scene before them, delivery trucks moving efficiently, employees coming and going without hassle, and even a few residents using the properly designated visitor spaces, Alex realized that their story had become more than just a tale of standing up to injustice. It had become a blueprint for positive change, showing how principle and perseverance could transform conflict into cooperation. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for widespread reform, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with one person willing to stand firm for what's right. In the quiet of his office, 6 years after the parking dispute that had changed everything, Alex sat reviewing a special commemorative edition of the Regional Business Journal. The magazine had dedicated an entire issue to exploring how one confrontation over property rights had sparked a nationwide movement for community governance reform. Sarah entered with her morning updates, but today she carried something different. A leather-bound book containing all their documentation from the original conflict. What had started as a defensive measure against HOA overreach had become a historical record, now frequently requested by researchers and community leaders studying effective governance models. "Look what I found while organizing these," Sarah said, pulling out a faded photograph. It showed the parking lot on that first chaotic morning, packed with unauthorized vehicles. "Hard to believe this is the same place." Through his window, Alex could see the current reality, an efficiently operating facility where business needs and community interests had found a harmonious balance. The contrast was striking. "We've got some interesting visitors today," Sarah continued. "A film crew from a national documentary series. They're doing a piece on transformative community conflicts, and apparently we're their prime example." The documentary team arrived mid-morning, led by a respected filmmaker known for exploring social change. As they set up their equipment, Alex noticed they were particularly interested in filming the parking lot from various angles. "This space represents more than just a business boundary," the director explained. "It's become a symbol of how standing up for principles can lead to positive systemic change." During the interview, Alex found himself reflecting deeper on the legacy of their conflict with Victoria Harrison's HOA. "The real victory wasn't just protecting our property rights," he explained to the camera. "It was showing that proper governance and mutual respect create stronger communities than intimidation ever could." Amanda Rodriguez joined them for part of the filming. The former interim HOA president who had helped transform Oak Ridge Estates had recently been appointed to a state commission on community governance reform. What happened here changed the conversation about HOA authority, Amanda explained during her interview. It showed that boundaries and accountability don't restrict communities, they make them healthier. The film crew was particularly interested in the community engagement center that had emerged from the conflict. As they filmed residents and business owners meeting to discuss shared initiatives, Alex remembered how Victoria had once tried to pit these groups against each other. Richard Torres arrived during the afternoon shoot, bringing news about the latest developments in HOA reform. 6 more states have adopted versions of the Community Accountability Act, he reported. They're all referencing our case in their legislative discussions. The documentary team captured these conversations, recognizing them as evidence of how a local dispute had sparked national change. They were especially intrigued by how the conflict had transformed both the business and residential communities. Later that day, Alex received an unexpected email. It was from a business owner in another state who had successfully challenged HOA overreach using their case as a template. Your stand gave us the courage and roadmap to protect our rights while maintaining community harmony, the email read. Sarah brought in the latest community newsletter, which featured an article about the upcoming Business Community Partnership Summit, an event that had grown from their local experience into a national conference. Remember when Victoria claimed we were against community interests? Sarah mused. Now we're literally teaching communities how to work better with businesses. As the documentary crew filmed their final shots, Alex walked through the parking lot with Amanda and Richard. The space that had once been a battlefield now served as a daily reminder of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to unexpected positive change. You know what's really remarkable, Amanda reflected. This could have ended so differently. If you had given in to Victoria's pressure, if you hadn't stood your ground professionally and legally, none of these changes would have happened. Richard nodded in agreement. Sometimes it takes one person willing to say no to show others what's possible. You didn't just protect your property rights, you helped create a new model for how communities can function. As the sun set over the warehouse, casting long shadows across the now peaceful parking lot, Alex considered how their story had evolved. What began as a simple defense of property rights had become a catalyst for transformation, showing how principled resistance to overreach could lead to better solutions for everyone. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a blueprint for positive change, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right. The documentary crew packed up their equipment, but the story they had captured would continue to influence communities long after they left. It was a testament to how one moment of principled resistance could spark lasting positive change, reminding future generations that standing up for what's right, even when difficult, could lead to transformations far beyond anything initially imagined. 7 years after the parking dispute, Alex stood in front of a packed auditorium at the National Community Governance Conference. The annual event, which had grown from their local experience, now attracted thousands of participants from across the country. Business owners, HOA leaders, and community advocates gathered to share insights about building better relationships between commercial and residential interests. When I walked into my warehouse parking lot that morning and found it filled with unauthorized vehicles, I never imagined it would lead to this, Alex began his keynote address. What started as a defense of property rights became something much more significant, a catalyst for reforming how communities and businesses interact. In the front row, Sarah sat with Amanda Rodriguez and Richard Torres, all now regular speakers at such events. The documentation system they had developed during their conflict had evolved into a comprehensive framework for business-community relations, adopted by organizations nationwide. After the speech, a young business owner approached Alex. "Your story helped me stand up to similar overreach in my community," she said. "But more importantly, it showed us how to turn conflict into cooperation." The conference center's main hall featured an exhibition about transformative community conflicts. Their parking dispute occupied a prominent space, with timeline displays showing how a local confrontation had sparked national change. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a map showing states that had adopted versions of the Community Accountability Act. 7 years ago, we were just trying to keep our parking lot clear. Now, we're helping shape policy across the country. During a panel discussion later that day, Amanda shared updates about Victoria Harrison. The former HOA president's book about her experience had become required reading in property management courses, not as a guide, but as a case study in how not to exercise authority. Victoria finally understood something important, Amanda explained to the audience. True community leadership isn't about power over others. It's about finding solutions that respect everyone's rights while benefiting the whole community. Richard Torres presented data showing how communities that had adopted their governance model had seen significant improvements in business-resident relations. Conflicts had decreased, cooperation had increased, and both commercial and residential property values had risen. "The Pacific solution isn't just about preventing HOA overreach," Richard explained. "It's about creating systems that encourage collaboration instead of confrontation." Back at the warehouse that evening, Alex hosted a small gathering of conference participants who wanted to see where it all began. The parking lot that had once been ground zero for their conflict now served as a model of efficient business operations and community cooperation. Linda Chen, who had helped expose Victoria's unauthorized actions, joined them. "You know what's remarkable," she observed. "This space represents both a boundary and a bridge. It shows how protecting rights and building relationships can go hand in hand." The Community Engagement Center adjacent to the warehouse was hosting its weekly meeting between business owners and residents. What had once seemed impossible under Victoria's leadership had become routine, people working together to address shared challenges through mutual respect and cooperation. As Alex watched the interaction, he received a message from James, his lawyer. The State Bar Association had made their case a permanent part of their property rights curriculum. "Your stand against that HOA didn't just protect your property," James wrote. "It helped establish new standards for community governance." Sarah brought news about the latest impact of their story. A national business magazine had named Pacific Distribution Solutions one of the top companies for community engagement, citing their transformation from conflict target to reform leader. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah mused, "what would have happened if you'd given in to Victoria's pressure that first day? How many other communities would still be struggling with unchecked HOA authority?" The documentary about their experience had begun airing on public television, reaching new audiences with its message about principled resistance and positive change. Alex had received messages from viewers across the country, sharing their own stories of standing up to institutional overreach. As evening fell, Alex took his customary walk through the parking lot. The space that had once been filled with unauthorized vehicles and tension now operated smoothly, a daily reminder of how standing firm for what's right could lead to unexpected transformations. Amanda joined him outside, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "You know what we really proved," she said, "that one person willing to say no to injustice while remaining professional and focused on solutions can create change that affects thousands of others." The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for widespread reform, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right. Looking at the peaceful scene before them, delivery trucks moving efficiently, employees parking without hassle, and residents using properly designated visitor spaces, Alex realized their story had become more than just a tale of victory over HOA overreach. It had become a blueprint for positive change, showing how principle and perseverance could transform conflict into cooperation, creating better communities for everyone. 8 years after the parking dispute, Alex found himself sitting in the governor's office, surrounded by state officials and community leaders. They had gathered to witness the signing of expanded legislation built upon the Community Accountability Act's success. The new laws would further strengthen property rights protections while promoting cooperative relationships between businesses and residential communities. What began in a warehouse parking lot has fundamentally changed how we think about community governance, the governor remarked before signing. This legislation ensures that the lessons learned from the Pacific Distribution Solutions case continue to benefit communities across our state. Sarah, who had become a recognized expert in business-community relations, was recording the ceremony for their company archives. The documentation habits they'd developed during their conflict had evolved into a comprehensive system for preserving and sharing knowledge about effective community engagement. After the ceremony, a senior policy advisor approached Alex. "You know, we've been tracking the impact of the original Community Accountability Act," she said. "Communities that adopted these reforms have seen a 70% reduction in property disputes and a significant increase in collaborative development projects." Back at the warehouse, Alex found a surprise waiting in his office. The original no parking sign they had posted during the conflict had been framed, along with photos documenting the transformation of their facility from battleground to model of community cooperation. "Look what else I found," Sarah said, bringing in a dusty folder. It contained Victoria Harrison's original unauthorized parking permits, now historical artifacts that regularly featured in presentations about HOA reform. Richard Torres arrived with news about the latest implementation of their governance model. 3 major cities have adopted our oversight committee structure, he reported. They're already seeing positive results in how business districts and residential areas interact. The Community Engagement Center was hosting a special event, a workshop for new HOA board members from across the state. Amanda Rodriguez, who had become a leading voice in community governance reform, was teaching them about the importance of balanced leadership and proper authority. The Pacific Distribution Solutions case isn't just about what not to do, Amanda explained to her audience. It's about understanding that true community strength comes from respect, cooperation, and clear boundaries. During a break in the workshop, Alex received a call from a national business organization. They wanted to create a certification program based on the principles that had emerged from their conflict, a way to recognize communities and businesses that exemplified best practices. In cooperation and governance, your experience has become a benchmark, the organization's director explained. We want to help others achieve the same level of positive community business relations. Sarah brought in the latest impact report they had compiled. It showed how communities that had adopted their governance model had experienced improvements across multiple metrics, from property values to resident satisfaction to business development. "Remember when Victoria claimed we were threatening community harmony?" Sarah asked. "Now we're literally teaching communities how to build stronger relationships while respecting everyone's rights." The documentary about their experience had sparked a series of educational videos, used in everything from business schools to HOA board training. Each video emphasized different aspects of their story, from the importance of proper documentation to the value of maintaining professionalism in conflict. Chen, who had helped expose Victoria's overreach, visited the warehouse to share news about a recent development. "You won't believe this," she said. "Victoria's book has become required reading in property management courses as a case study in the dangers of unchecked authority." As afternoon turned to evening, Alex walked through the parking lot with Amanda and Richard. The space that had once been filled with unauthorized vehicles now represented something powerful, how standing up for principles could lead to positive systemic change. "You know what's remarkable?" Amanda reflected. "This could have ended so differently. If you had given in to pressure, if you hadn't stood your ground professionally, none of these reforms would have happened." Richard nodded in agreement. Sometimes it takes one person willing to say no to show others what's possible. You didn't just protect your property rights, you helped create a new standard for community governance. Alex watched as employees left for the day, their cars moving smoothly through the lot that had once been the center of such conflict. The scene was a daily reminder of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to unexpected positive change. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for widespread reform, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right. Looking at the peaceful scene before them, the well-organized parking lot, the thriving business operations, and the engaged community, Alex realized their story had become more than just a tale of victory over HOA overreach. It had become a blueprint for positive change, showing how principle and perseverance could transform conflict into cooperation, creating better communities for everyone. 9 years had passed since the parking dispute that transformed not just a community, but sparked a nationwide movement in HOA reform. On a crisp autumn morning, Alex stood in front of his warehouse, watching a film crew set up their equipment. PBS was producing a special documentary series titled "Moments That Matter: How Small Stands Changed America," and the Pacific Distribution Solutions story had been chosen as their opening episode. "It's still remarkable," the senior producer said, adjusting her camera angle to capture both the parking lot and the community engagement center. "How one conflict over parking spaces led to such fundamental changes in how communities govern themselves." Sarah approached with a thick binder of collected media coverage from the past 9 years. "Look at this timeline we've put together," she said, opening to a particularly striking spread. "From that first confrontation with Victoria to today's national impact, it's all documented here." The morning's first interview was with a panel of experts in community governance, including Amanda Rodriguez, who had become a nationally recognized authority on HOA reform. They gathered in the conference room, where walls displayed framed newspaper articles chronicling their journey. "What makes the Pacific Distribution Solutions case so significant," one expert explained to the camera, "is how it demonstrated that protecting property rights and building strong community relations aren't mutually exclusive goals. In fact, they reinforce each other when handled properly." Richard Torres arrived during a filming break, carrying news about the latest adaptation of their governance model. "The Federal Housing Administration is now recommending our oversight committee structure as a best practice for all new planned communities," he announced. "They're citing our case as evidence of its effectiveness." The documentary team was particularly interested in filming the parking lot during peak business hours. What had once been a scene of chaos and conflict now operated with remarkable efficiency. Delivery trucks moving smoothly, employees parking without hassle, and even designated visitor spaces being used respectfully by residents. The physical space tells the story, the director noted. It's not just about where cars can park, it's about how clear boundaries and mutual respect create better outcomes for everyone. During lunch, Alex received an unexpected call. A major university's business school was creating a dedicated center for community business relations, and they wanted to name it the Pacific Solutions Institute in honor of how their case had changed the landscape of community governance. Your experience has become a cornerstone in how we teach future business leaders about community engagement, the dean explained. It's not just about winning conflicts, it's about transforming them into opportunities for positive change. Sarah brought in the latest statistics about communities that had adopted their governance model. The numbers were impressive. Reduced conflicts, increased property values, improved business-resident cooperation, and higher overall satisfaction rates among both commercial and residential stakeholders. Remember when Victoria claimed we were being selfish? Sarah mused. Now communities are literally competing to show how well they can implement our cooperation model. The afternoon's filming focused on the Community Engagement Center, where a meeting between business owners and residents was taking place. The scene captured exactly what their struggle had achieved. People who might once have been adversaries, working together to build better communities. Linda Chen joined them for the final interviews, bringing an interesting update about Victoria. Harrison, she's actually become an advocate for HOA reform, Linda revealed. She travels around speaking about how her experience showed her the importance of balanced governance and proper authority. As the film crew captured sunset shots of the warehouse and its surroundings, Alex walked through the parking lot with Amanda and Richard. The space that had once been ground zero for their conflict now served as a daily reminder of how standing up for principles could lead to unexpected positive changes. You know what's most impressive? Amanda reflected. It's not just the legal reforms or new governance models. It's how this changed people's understanding of what community really means. Richard nodded in agreement. 9 years ago, this was just about parking spaces. Now it's about how communities and businesses can work together to create something better than either could achieve alone. The documentary team gathered their final shots as evening approached. Their cameras captured more than just a well-organized parking lot and successful business. They recorded the legacy of how one principled stand against injustice had sparked widespread positive change. As the day drew to a close, Alex received an email from James, his lawyer from the original conflict. Another state had just passed its version of the Community Accountability Act, making it the 30th state to adopt reforms inspired by their case. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands, Alex reflected, watching the last employees leave for the day. The parking lot that had once been filled with unauthorized vehicles and tension now operated smoothly, a testament to how principled resistance to overreach could lead to better solutions for everyone. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for widespread reform, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. 10 years had passed since the parking dispute that changed everything. On the anniversary of that fateful morning, Alex stood in his office looking out over the parking lot that had become so much more than just a place for vehicles. It had become a symbol of how standing up for what's right could transform entire communities. The morning sunlight illuminated a newly installed commemorative plaque near the entrance to the warehouse. It read, "Site of the Pacific Solutions Movement, where one stand for property rights transformed community governance nationwide." The plaque had been commissioned by the State Historical Society, recognizing the significance of what had happened. Here, Sarah entered with her morning updates, but today they were special. "You won't believe the latest numbers," she said. spreading documents across his desk. 500 communities across the country have now fully adopted our governance model. The success rates are unprecedented. The statistics told a remarkable story. Communities that had implemented their oversight system showed dramatic improvements. 80% reduction in property disputes, 60% increase in business community cooperation, and significantly higher satisfaction rates among both residents and business owners. There's more, Sarah continued. The National Association of Property Managers is making our case study mandatory reading for all certification programs. They're calling it the definitive example of how not to exercise authority and how to fix it when it goes wrong. Amanda Rodriguez arrived for their regular meeting, but today she brought unexpected news. Victoria Harrison contacted me. She said, she's retiring from the speaking circuit, but she wanted to share something. The book she wrote about her experience just got picked up by a major publisher. They're releasing an expanded edition focusing on community transformation. Richard Torres joined them, carrying architectural plans for something new. Remember how this all started with a parking problem? He asked, spreading the blueprints across the conference table. Look at this. 6 more cities are implementing our shared facility model. What started here has literally changed how communities design their infrastructure. The Community Engagement Center was bustling with activity. A delegation from another state's governance commission was touring the facility, studying how the center had become a model for business community cooperation. The most valuable lesson, Alex explained to the delegation, wasn't just about standing up to overreach. It was about showing how proper boundaries and mutual respect create better outcomes for everyone. During lunch, they received a surprise video call from James, their original lawyer. He was teaching at a prestigious law school now, using their case to show future attorneys how property rights disputes could lead to positive systemic change. You didn't just win a legal battle, James reminded them. You created a blueprint for how communities can govern themselves more effectively. That's why this case keeps spreading. It shows a better way forward. Linda Chen stopped by in the afternoon, bringing an interesting perspective. You know what I realized, she said. Victoria's biggest mistake wasn't just trying to take over your parking lot. It was not understanding that true community strength comes from cooperation, not control. As the day progressed, Alex received calls and messages from across the country. Business owners, community leaders, and residents shared how the principles established by their case had helped transform their own communities. Sarah brought in a special edition of the Regional Business Journal. The cover story chronicled how their parking dispute had evolved into a national movement for community governance reform. From conflict to cooperation, the 10-year legacy of the Pacific Solutions case, read the headline. The article detailed how their experience had influenced everything from local ordinances to state laws, from business school curricula to property management practices. What had started as one business owner's stand against HOA overreach had become a template for positive community transformation. Near day's end, Alex took his customary walk through the parking lot. The space that had once been filled with unauthorized vehicles and tension now operated with remarkable efficiency, a daily reminder of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to unexpected positive change. Amanda and Richard joined him outside, all of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. You know what's truly remarkable, Amanda said. This could have ended so differently if you had given in to pressure. If you hadn't stood your ground professionally, none of these changes would have happened. Sometimes it takes one person willing to say no to show others what's possible, Richard added. You didn't just protect your property rights, you helped create a new standard for how communities can work together. As the sun set over the warehouse, casting long shadows, Across the now peaceful parking lot, Alex realized their story had become more than just a tale of victory over HOA overreach. It had become a blueprint for positive change, showing how principle and perseverance could transform conflict into cooperation. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for widespread reform, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. Looking at the thriving business operations, the engaged community, and the harmonious relationship between them, Alex understood that their legacy would continue to influence communities long into the future. It stood as a testament to how standing up for principles, while maintaining professionalism and focus on solutions, could create positive change far beyond anything initially imagined. 15 years after the parking dispute, Alex stood in front of an eager group of graduate students at the newly established Pacific Solutions Institute. The university had created this specialized center to study and teach the principles of effective business-community relations that had emerged from their case. When people ask me about legacy, Alex began his lecture, they often expect me to talk about the laws that changed or the reforms that spread nationwide. But the real legacy is in how communities now understand that protecting rights and building relationships aren't opposing goals. The lecture hall itself told part of their story. The walls displayed timelines showing how a simple parking dispute had evolved into a movement that transformed community governance across the country. Display cases held artifacts from the original conflict, Victoria's unauthorized parking permits, the first no parking signs, and the documentation that had proved so crucial. Sarah, who had become a regular guest lecturer at the Institute, joined him for the Q&A session. A student raised her hand, asking about the latest statistics. As of last month, Sarah reported, over 700 communities have fully adopted the Pacific Solutions model. The success rates continue to exceed expectations, proving that when you establish clear boundaries and foster mutual respect, everyone benefits. During a break between sessions, Alex received an unexpected message. The National Property Rights Foundation was establishing an annual award in his name, recognizing individuals who demonstrated exceptional leadership in transforming community conflicts into opportunities for positive change. Your case didn't just protect one business's rights, the foundation's director wrote. It created a framework for how communities and businesses can work together while respecting each other's boundaries. Amanda Rodriguez, who had become a distinguished professor of community governance, joined them for lunch. She brought news about a recent development that perfectly illustrated their story's continuing impact. Remember how Victoria used to claim that strong HOA authority was necessary for community welfare? Amanda asked. Well, the latest research shows that communities using our oversight model have significantly better outcomes. Higher property values, stronger business relationships, and greater resident satisfaction. Richard Torres arrived with architectural plans for a major new development project. The designers had incorporated all the lessons learned from their case, from shared facility arrangements to integrated community engagement spaces. This wouldn't have been possible 15 years ago, Richard explained, spreading the plans across the table. Back then, developments were designed around conflict and control. Now they're built for cooperation and mutual benefit. The afternoon session focused on practical applications of their experience. Students presented case studies showing how different communities had adapted the Pacific Solutions model to their specific needs. Each success story demonstrated how the principles established during their parking dispute could be applied to various situations. Linda Chen, who had gone on to become a respected consultant on community relations, shared her perspective with the students. The genius of what happened here, she explained, wasn't just in standing up to overreach, it was in showing how protecting rights and building community could work together. As the day progressed, Alex received updates about communities that had recently adopted their governance model. Each report showed the same pattern: reduced conflicts, improved cooperation, and stronger relationships between businesses and residents. Sarah brought in the latest edition of a national business magazine. The cover story examined how their case had influenced a new generation of business leaders and community organizers. "It's fascinating," Sarah noted, "how what started as a defense of property rights has become a model for positive community transformation. New developments are literally being designed around these principles." Near the end of the day, Alex took his customary walk through the parking lot with Amanda and Richard. The space that had once been ground zero for their conflict now served as a living example of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to unexpected positive change. "You know what's most remarkable?" Amanda reflected. "This story keeps growing. Each new community that adopts these principles adds their own chapter, their own innovations." Richard nodded in agreement. 15 years ago, we were just trying to protect a parking lot. Now we're watching these ideas shape how future communities are built and governed." As evening approached, Alex received one final piece of news. A major university press was publishing a comprehensive study of how their case had influenced community development over the past 15 years. The research showed that their experience had fundamentally changed how people thought about community governance and business-resident relationships. Looking out over the parking lot that had started it all, Alex realized that their story had become something larger than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about winning a conflict or protecting property rights. It was about showing how standing up for principles while maintaining professionalism could create positive change that continued to grow and evolve. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for ongoing transformation, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. As the sun set on another day, the legacy of their stand against injustice continued to influence and inspire, showing future generations that positive change was possible when principles and perseverance came together. 20 years had passed since the parking dispute that changed the landscape of community governance. On this significant anniversary, Alex found himself standing on a stage at the National Community Development Convention, looking out at thousands of attendees who had gathered to learn from their experience. 2 decades ago, Alex began his keynote speech, if someone had told me that a conflict over parking spaces would lead to fundamental changes in how communities across the country operate, I wouldn't have believed them. Yet here we are. The Convention Center's main hall featured an interactive exhibition chronicling the evolution of what had become known as the Pacific Solutions movement. Virtual reality stations allowed visitors to experience key moments from their story, from the first discovery of unauthorized vehicles to the transformation that followed. Sarah, who had become the leading authority on implementing their governance model, operated a workshop station where community leaders could learn practical applications of their principles. "The numbers continue to tell the story," she explained to an eager group. "Over 1,000 communities have now fully adopted these principles. The success rates are consistent: reduced conflicts, improved cooperation, and stronger economic growth for both residential and business sectors." During a break between sessions, Alex received news that highlighted how far their influence had spread. An international delegation of urban planners was studying their case as a model for developing new communities in rapidly growing cities overseas. Your experience has universal applications, the delegation's leader explained. The principles you established about balancing rights with cooperation transcend cultural boundaries. Amanda Rodriguez joined them for a panel discussion about the lasting impact of their case. She had just completed a comprehensive study examining how communities that adopted their model had evolved over time. What's fascinating, Amanda shared with the audience, is how these principles continue to adapt and grow. Each community that implements them adds new innovations while maintaining the core values of respect and cooperation. Richard Torres, who had helped spread their model through his work in urban development, presented stunning visualization of how city planning had changed because of their influence. "Look at these designs," he said, displaying before and after images. 20 years ago, businesses and residential areas were seen as naturally conflicting interests. Now developments are planned with integration and cooperation in mind from the start. The afternoon sessions included testimonials from community leaders who had transformed their own regions using the Pacific Solutions model. Each story demonstrated how the principles established during their parking dispute could adapt to different situations and scales. Linda Chen, who had documented the original conflict and its aftermath, premiered a new documentary series titled The Ripple Effect, 20 Years of Community Transformation. What started in that parking lot, Linda explained during the screening, didn't just solve one conflict. It provided a blueprint for how communities could govern themselves more effectively. As the convention continued, Alex received updates about the latest adaptations of their model. Communities were now using artificial intelligence and smart technology to implement their principles more effectively, while maintaining the human element that made their approach successful. Sarah brought reports showing how the economic impact of their governance model had exceeded all expectations. Communities that had fully implemented their principles showed consistently higher property values, stronger business growth, and greater resident satisfaction than those using traditional governance methods. "It's not just about avoiding conflicts anymore," Sarah noted. "It's about creating environments where both businesses and residents can thrive together." Near the end of the day, Alex participated in a special ceremony recognizing the pioneers of community governance reform. The parking lot dispute that had started it all was now studied as a turning point in how communities approach development and governance. "You know what's truly remarkable?" Amanda reflected during the ceremony. "This story keeps teaching us new lessons. Every time we think we've understood its full impact, another community finds a new way to apply these principles." Richard nodded. "In agreement. 20 years ago, we were just trying to protect property rights. Now we're watching these ideas shape the future of urban development worldwide." As evening approached, Alex received word that a major foundation was establishing a research center dedicated to studying and advancing the principles that had emerged from their case. The center would focus on finding new ways to apply their model to emerging challenges in community development. Looking out over the convention center filled with people eager to learn from their experience, Alex realized that their story had become something even more significant than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about resolving conflicts or protecting rights. It was about showing how principled stands could create positive change that continued to grow and evolve across generations. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for ongoing transformation, proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. The convention drew to a close, The legacy of their stand against injustice continued to influence and inspire, showing future generations that positive change was possible when principles, perseverance, and the willingness to transform conflict into cooperation came together. 25 years after the parking dispute, Alex sat in his office, reviewing a special global impact report. The Pacific Solutions model had spread far beyond anything they could have imagined that first morning when he discovered unauthorized vehicles in his warehouse parking lot. Sarah entered with her morning briefing, but today's update was particularly significant. The United Nations Development Programme has officially recommended our governance model for rapidly developing urban areas worldwide, she announced, laying the report on his desk. They're citing our 25 years of data as proof that balanced community governance leads to sustainable development. The transformation of their local conflict into a global movement for community reform had surprised even its most ardent supporters. The principles that emerged from their parking dispute were now being taught in urban planning programs across 5 continents. Look at these implementation statistics, Sarah continued, pulling up a holographic display. Over 2,000 communities worldwide have adopted our model. The success rates are consistent across different cultures and economic systems. Amanda Rodriguez arrived for their regular meeting, bringing news about the latest academic research. Universities are studying our case not just for community governance, she explained, but as a model for conflict transformation in various fields. They're finding applications in everything from corporate management to international relations. Richard Torres joined them, carrying designs for a revolutionary new urban development project. "This is how far we've come," he said, activating a 3D visualization. 25 years ago, we were fighting over parking spaces. Now, cities are being built from the ground up using principles that emerged from our experience. The visualization showed how modern urban planning had evolved to integrate business and residential interests seamlessly, creating communities designed for cooperation rather than conflict. The parking dispute that had seemed so overwhelming 25 years ago had led to fundamental changes in how people thought about community development. Linda Chen arrived with advance copies of her latest book, The Pacific Solutions Legacy: How One Local Dispute Changed Global Community Development. The book tracked how their principles had spread and evolved over a quarter century. "You know what's fascinating?" Linda remarked, opening to a particularly striking chapter. "Each generation finds new ways to apply these principles. What started as a solution to a parking conflict has become a framework for addressing complex social challenges." During lunch, Alex received a call from the director of the Pacific Solutions Institute, the academic center established to study and promote their governance model had expanded into a global network of research facilities. "We're seeing remarkable innovations," the director reported. "Communities are combining your principles with emerging technologies to create smart governance systems that maintain the human element while improving efficiency." Sarah brought in the latest community impact assessment. The data showed how areas that had adopted their model continued to outperform traditional governance structures across all metrics, from economic growth to resident satisfaction to environmental sustainability. "Remember when Victoria claimed strong-arm tactics were necessary for effective community management?" Sarah mused. 25 years of data prove exactly the opposite. Cooperation and respect consistently produce better outcomes. In the afternoon, Alex participated in a virtual conference with community leaders from around the world. Each shared how they had adapted the Pacific Solutions model to their local contexts while maintaining its core principles of balanced governance and mutual respect. "The genius of your model one leader from Singapore explained, is that it provides a framework for cooperation without sacrificing individual rights. It shows how communities can be both strong and fair. Richard joined Alex for a walk through the parking lot that had started it all. The space had evolved over the years, incorporating smart technology and sustainable design elements. But it remained a symbol of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to unexpected positive change. 25 years, Richard reflected, and we're still learning new lessons from what happened here. Every time we think we understand the full impact, someone finds a new application for these principles. As evening approached, Alex received word that a major international foundation was launching an initiative to implement their governance model in developing communities worldwide. The project would combine their proven principles with innovative approaches to address contemporary challenges. Looking out over the parking lot that had once been a battlefield, Alex realized that their story had become something even more significant than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about resolving a local dispute or protecting property rights. It had become a blueprint for positive social transformation that continued to evolve and adapt to new challenges. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for ongoing global change, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. As the sun set on another day, the legacy of their stand against injustice continued to influence and inspire, showing future generations that positive change was possible when principles, perseverance, and the willingness to transform conflict into cooperation came together. 30 years had passed since the morning Alex discovered unauthorized vehicles in his warehouse parking lot. On this significant anniversary, he stood in the extensively renovated Pacific Solutions Institute, now a global center for community governance studies. The facility had grown from a simple warehouse into a living monument to how principled resistance could spark worldwide change. Sarah, who had become the Institute's executive director, was leading a special anniversary presentation. The holographic displays around them showed real-time data from thousands of communities worldwide that had implemented their governance model. 3 decades of data tell an extraordinary story, Sarah explained to the gathered audience of international delegates. What began as a simple stand for property rights has influenced community development on every continent. The numbers are unprecedented. Over 3,000 communities worldwide have adopted these principles, with a 95% success rate in improving business-community relations. Amanda Rodriguez, now a globally recognized authority on community governance, presented her latest research findings. The most remarkable aspect, she noted, is how these principles continue to evolve and adapt. Each new generation finds innovative ways to apply them to contemporary challenges. Richard Torres joined them, bringing visualizations of the latest urban developments inspired by their model. "Look at how city planning has transformed," he said, activating a massive 3D display. "Modern communities are now designed around cooperation, rather than conflict, with integrated spaces that serve both business and residential needs efficiently." The morning's proceedings were interrupted by exciting news. The United Nations had just adopted a resolution recommending the Pacific Solutions model as a framework for sustainable urban development worldwide. The principles that emerged from their parking dispute were now officially recognized as best practices for community governance at the international level. Linda Chen, who had documented their journey from the beginning, shared a preview of her new documentary series. 30 years of transformation, the Pacific Solutions legacy, traced how their local conflict had evolved into a global movement for positive change. What makes this story endure Linda explained, is its universal truth that standing up for what's right, while maintaining professionalism and focusing on solutions, can create positive change far beyond anything initially imagined. During lunch, Alex received calls from community leaders around the world sharing how their model had transformed their own regions. From small towns to major cities, the principles established during their parking dispute had proven adaptable and effective across different cultures and contexts. Sarah brought in a special edition of the Global Community Development Journal, dedicated to analyzing the 30-year impact of their case. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a particularly striking statistic. "Communities that adopted our model show consistently higher rates of economic growth, social cohesion, and environmental sustainability." The afternoon session featured testimonials from the next generation of community leaders who had grown up in areas transformed by their principles. Their stories demonstrated how the impact of that initial stand for property rights continued to influence and inspire new approaches to community governance. "The most valuable lesson we learned from your experience," one young leader explained, "wasn't just about standing up to overreach. It was about showing how protecting rights and building community relationships can work together to create something better than either could achieve alone." Richard and Amanda joined Alex for a walk through the original parking lot, now a historic site that attracted visitors from around the world. The space that had once been a battlefield had become a symbol of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to positive systemic change. 30 years, Amanda reflected, and the ripple effects keep spreading. Every time we think we've seen the full impact, someone finds a new way to apply these principles. As evening approached, Alex received word that a major international development bank was launching a global initiative to implement their governance model in emerging communities worldwide. The project would combine their proven principles with cutting-edge technology to address contemporary urban challenges. Looking out over the transformed landscape that had grown from their original conflict, Alex realized that their story had become something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about winning a local dispute or protecting property rights. It had become a blueprint for positive social transformation that continued to evolve and adapt to new challenges. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for ongoing global change, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. As the sun set on this anniversary day, the legacy of their stand against injustice continued to influence and inspire, showing future generations that positive change was possible when principles, perseverance, and the willingness to transform conflict into cooperation came together. The story that began in a warehouse parking lot had become a timeless lesson in how standing up for what's right, while maintaining professionalism and focus on solutions, could create positive change that transcended generations and borders. 35 years after the parking dispute that changed everything, Alex stood in the center of what had once been his warehouse parking lot. The space had been transformed into the global center for community governance, a living testament to how one person's stand for principle could spark worldwide change. Sarah, now the center's chief executive, joined him for this moment of reflection. "It's almost hard to believe," she said, gesturing to the modern facility around them. "All of this started because you refused to let someone take what wasn't rightfully theirs." The center had become more than just a building. It was the heart of a global movement. Interactive displays throughout the facility showed real-time data from the thousands of communities worldwide that had adopted their governance model. Amanda Rodriguez, who had become one of the world's leading voices in community development, approached with the latest impact report. "The numbers are extraordinary," she explained. "Over 4,000 communities across 6 continents have now implemented these principles. The success rates continue to exceed expectations." Richard Torres arrived with holographic projections showing the evolution of urban planning over the past 3.5 decades. "This is your legacy," he said, activating the display. "Modern cities are now designed around cooperation rather than conflict. The principles that emerge from our parking dispute have literally shaped how we build communities." The morning's celebration was interrupted by breaking news. The World Bank had announced a major initiative to implement their governance model in developing regions worldwide. The principles that had emerged from their local conflict were now being used to shape the future of global urban development. Chen, who had chronicled their journey from the beginning, presented the final installment of her documentary series. From Parking Lot to Global Movement, the complete Pacific Solutions story captured how a simple stand for property rights had evolved into a worldwide force for positive change. "What makes this story so powerful," Linda explained, "is that it shows how principled resistance to injustice, when combined with professionalism and a focus on solutions, can create change that spans generations." During lunch, Alex received video calls from community leaders around the world, sharing how their model had transformed their regions. From small villages to major metropolitan areas, the principles established during their parking dispute had proven universally applicable. Sarah brought in a special commemorative edition of the International Journal of Community Development. "Look at this analysis," she said, highlighting a key passage. "Communities that adopted our model show not just improved governance, but stronger social bonds, better economic outcomes, and more sustainable development." The afternoon featured presentations from young leaders who had grown up in communities transformed by their principles. Their stories demonstrated how the impact of that initial stand for property rights continued to inspire new approaches to community governance. "Your experience taught us," one young leader explained, "that protecting individual rights and building strong communities aren't opposing goals. They're essential parts of the same solution." Richard and Amanda joined Alex for a final walk through the grounds of what had once been his warehouse. The space that had been ground zero for their conflict had become a symbol of how principled resistance to injustice could lead to positive systemic change. 35 years, Amanda reflected, and the story keeps growing. Every new generation finds ways to apply these principles to the challenges of their time. As evening approached, Alex received word that major universities worldwide were incorporating their case into their core curricula, not just for urban planning and community development, but as a model for effective conflict transformation in various fields. Looking out over the transformed landscape that had grown from their original conflict, Alex realized that their story had become something far more profound than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just about winning a local dispute or protecting property rights. It had become a blueprint for positive social transformation that continued to evolve and adapt to new challenges. The parking dispute that had once threatened to tear their community apart had instead become a catalyst for ongoing global change, proving that sometimes the most significant transformations begin with one person's courage to stand firm for what's right, even when faced with seemingly overwhelming opposition. As the sun set on this anniversary day, the legacy of their stand against injustice continued to influence and inspire, showing future generations that positive change was possible when principles, perseverance, and the willingness to transform conflict into cooperation came together. The story that began in a warehouse parking lot had become a timeless lesson in how standing up for what's right, while maintaining professionalism and focus on solutions, could create positive change that transcended generations and borders. In the end, what had started as one person's defense of property rights had evolved into a global movement for positive community transformation, proving that sometimes the smallest stands for principle can lead to the most profound and lasting changes. As Alex took one final look at the center that had grown from their conflict, he understood that their legacy would continue to influence and inspire long into the future, showing that when someone stands firm for what's right, the ripples of positive change can extend far beyond anything initially imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.